Hello students, welcome back to our English class. So today we are going to study second chapter from class 10 textbook First Flight, which is Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. I hope now you all are clear about the few terms which we discussed in the last video. So now, coming to the chapter, Mandela becomes South Africa's first black president. This is a newspaper extract given for your reading. Now, coming to the activity, I hope you all have tried doing this match the following activity. Let me give you the answers. The first one, rainbow gathering of different colors and nations. It is a beautiful coming together of various peoples like the colors in a rainbow. And here, in this context, Mandela is talking about people of different skin color, blacks and whites together. Next, the seat of white supremacy, the center of racial superiority. Then, be overwhelmed with a sense of history. Feel deeply emotional, remembering and understanding all the past events that have led up to the moment. Resilience that defies the imagination, a great ability to remain unchanged by suffering, not losing hope, goodness, or courage. A glimmer of humanity. It's a sign of human feeling, of goodness, kindness, pity, justice, etc. A twilight existence, a half-secret life like a life lived in the fading light between sunset and darkness. So with that, I hope you all have checked your answers. Now coming to the text, and I hope you all remember that what is this? This chapter of yours is an extract from the autobiography of Nelson Mandela, and autobiography is story of one's life written by oneself. So, in first and the second paragraph, he is discussing the inauguration ceremony, the installation of the first democratic government where Nelson Mandela was chosen as the president. 10th May dawned bright and clear. So on which day this ceremony took place? On 10th of May. And he says many dignitaries, many people holding dignitaries are people holding special positions. So many dignitaries from all over the world have come to attend this ceremony and to pay their respects. And the ceremony is taking place in Sandstone Amphitheatre. Amphitheatre, you can see it is given in your textbook. A building without a roof with many rows of seats rising in steps. So a theatre kind of a place which does not have a roof but ample seats for people to sit there. And it is in the place of Pretoria. The ceremony is taking place in Pretoria. So many people have come there and there is a rainbow gathering of colors. People earlier he has mentioned that jubilant scenes were there on the street. People are celebrating, they are happy. More than 1 lakh people have been gathered there to celebrate. And he says that it was coming to the third paragraph, you can see students, on that lovely autumn day, I was accompanied by my daughter Zenani. So, lovely autumn day. Did you notice here? In the first paragraph, he's saying the day is 10th of May. Students, is May autumn? No. Then why has Mandela here mentioned May as autumn? Yes, some of you might have got the answer. For others who have not got, May is not autumn in India, but it is autumn in South Africa, because we are at different latitudes and longitudes, and we are having different seasons at different at the same month, in the same month. So if it is summer in India in May, it is autumn in South Africa. So now he says, first the second and the first deputy president took their oaths, which are Mr. De Klerk and Thabo Mbeki. They swear in as the first and the second deputy president. Then it was his turn, and he's mentioning how he pledged to uphold the constitution, to devote his life to the wellness of people. Then he says that they all together confer glory and hope to newborn liberty. Now, what was newborn liberty? Newborn liberty because this new democratic government was born on that day. So they want it, they want to glorify it, they want it to sustain forever. Then there is an important line here. Out of the experience of an extraordinary human disaster that lasted too long must be born a society of which all humanity will be proud. So, experience of an extraordinary human disaster. Here, what is he mentioning as extraordinary human disaster? The oppression of blacks by whites is here termed as human disaster. And then he says, now a society will be born that humanity will be proud of. And now coming to the next, he says, he thanks all the distinguished guests who have come from far across places to wish him to see this occasion, to grace this occasion. And he says that this is a common victory of justice. He says this is not my victory or my party's victory, but this is common victory for justice, for peace, and for human dignity. We have at last achieved our political emancipation. Emancipation is freedom. So he says, now we've achieved freedom. We pledge ourselves to liberate all our people from continuing bondage of poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender, and other discrimination. Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another. So he says, now no one will oppress the others, and this land will never experience such kind of oppression of one race by another. Then coming to the next paragraph, he mentions here that there was a spectacular array, a spectacular display made by the jets, the airplanes in the sky. Students, you might have experienced this if you have seen the celebration of our national festivals. For example, on Republic Day, our jets also make certain display in the sky and to celebrate something. But here he mentions that it was not a display of pinpoint precision and military force, but it was demonstration of military's loyalty to democracy, or military's loyalty to fairly elected government. So this was supposed to be the fairest government ever formed in South Africa. Then he says that he mentions the generals of South Africa. He says they saluted me today and they pledged their loyalty to me. But he says that I was not unmindful of the fact He says, I am very much aware of the fact that not so many years before they would not have saluted me but arrested me. So he says, earlier they could have arrested me. Like you all know that he spent more than 25 years, around 27 to 30 years in jail for the freedom of his race, of his country, for this fair means of elections, this fair means of government to rule his country. So he says now smoke trails were left and that wonderful display was enjoyed by everybody. Now in the next stanza he mentions that after this two national anthems were sung, two different national anthems, one of whites and other of blacks. Two national anthems were sung together. It happened for the first time, and he says none of the group knew the lyrics of others' anthem. Whites did not know the lyrics of blacks' anthem, and blacks did not know the lyrics of whites' anthem because they despised it, they hated it earlier. But now he says they all would soon learn both the anthems by heart. Now next he says that he is very happy, he is very emotional, he's overwhelmed at this particular moment, and he says he remembers that a few years after the bitter Anglo-Boer War and before my own birth, the white-skinned people of South Africa patched up their differences and erected a system of racial domination against dark-skinned peoples of their own land. So he remembers when this type of government was erected, which started oppressing blacks, and he considers this as one of the most harshest and most inhumane societies the world has ever known. He says this was very bad of government to oppress other on the basis of their skin, their color, and now this would never happen. Now in the next paragraph he remembers the great sacrifices of other freedom fighters also, and he says that I felt that day as I have on so many other days, that I was simply the sum of all those African patriots who had gone before me. So he says, no, I am not the only one who got this freedom, but many went before me, and I am. He says, very beautifully he has expressed here that I was simply the sum of those African patriots. I have learned from them, and it's not only my effort, it is so much of their effort also. Then coming to the next paragraph, he says the policy of apartheid created a deep and lasting wound in my country and my people. So he says this would take years to recover. The wound the whites have given to the blacks is very harsh, is very deep, and it would take time to recover from that deep, from that serious hurt, from that profound hurt. And he says that but the decades, I'll read it out for you. But the decades of oppression and brutality had another unintended effect that was that it produced the Oliver Tambos, Walter Sisulus, the Chief Lutulus, Yusuf Dadus, Bram Fishers, the Robert Sobukals of our time, men of such extraordinary wisdom, courage and generosity that there may never be known again. So he says many people like Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, Chief Luthuli. So he is given here you can see the pictures also of these freedom fighters. He says that these people were courageous, had wisdom, and they inspired many others like me. It's not only me. He remembers everything. And he says a very beautiful thing in the next few lines. Students, you all might be knowing that South Africa is rich in minerals like gold and diamond. They export a lot of gold and diamond. So he says, he compares his people with diamonds. Mandela here compares his people to the diamond, and he says, my country is rich in the minerals and gems that lie beneath soil, but I've always known that its greatest wealth is its people, finer and truer than purest diamonds. So he says, though our country has diamonds, but my people are even purer than diamonds. And in the next paragraph, he gives a very interesting and important lesson to all of us. He says, I have learned from these courageous comrades, from these freedom fighters a lot, and I have learned that courage was not the absence of fear but the triumph over it. He says, courage is not the absence of fear. He says that we were afraid, these people were afraid, but we overcame that fear. We overcame that fear, and of course everyone is afraid, but we have to overcome our fear to be victorious. You might have heard an advertisement in Hindi, डर के आगे जीत है, Mountain Dew. So it's the same. डर के आगे जीत है. डर तो ज़रूर है, लेकिन डर के आगे जीत है. So he says, the brave man is not one who's not afraid. Everyone is afraid, but the brave is one who conquers this fear. Next, also he gives a very important lesson. Next paragraph, he says that hate is not inborn. Nobody hates others. Hate is never inborn. People are not born with hate. They learn to hate. They are groomed in such a manner. If I teach you to hate someone, and every day I speak against those people and I say those are bad, you must hate them, more or less the hate will be engraved in your heart and you'll start hating them. So he says people are never born with hate. And where did he realize it? He says, when I was in prison, and he says I saw the glimpse of humanity in the guards. Though they were oppressing us, they were torturing us, they were not behaving properly with us, but still at some point of time I saw goodness in their eyes. So this made me believe that hate is not born, but it is grown. So we grow hate in our hearts. We are not born with hate in our hearts. Then next he comes to again an important point according to your question answers also. He says every man has twin obligations. According to Mandela, every person has twin obligations, and twin means two. So one here is towards his family and the other is towards his community or country. So he says earlier, he goes back to his earlier journey, and he says, I was not the one who was always keen to be present for his country every time, or who was always eager to die for the country or to fight for the country. I was also a normal man and who attempted to live as a human being, as a normal human being. But then what happened? Slowly this hunger of freedom was created in his heart after a few years. How? He says, I found that I was prevented from fulfilling my obligations as a son, a brother, a father, and a husband. He says, I did not in the beginning choose to place my people over my country. He says, I chose my family first. But, and he says, next paragraph, he says, I was not born with the hunger to be free. I was born free. He says, he never knew that he needs freedom. He thought he is free. When he was a child, when he was a boy, in his boyhood, he thought freedom is running to the fields, running through the village, and move around as one wanted. That is all the freedom, and that he had. So then he says, in the next phase of his life, he discovered the freedom of a young man, which was to stay out late at night, to go to the places where he wanted, and nothing else. This was his idea of freedom when he was a student. So he says that at that period of time, I was happy with that kind of freedom. But later on, he says, as a young man in Johannesburg, I yearned for basic and honorable freedoms of achieving my potential, of earning my keep, of marrying and having a family, the freedom not to be obstructed in a lawful life. Then his freedom was to earn a living, to marry someone, to have a family and live happily. So this was, in next phase of life, this was his idea of freedom, and he was happy doing this. But then again he says, slowly I saw that not only was the freedom, that was not the freedom living your own life, earning your money. He says, I realized that my brothers and sisters are not free. Which brothers and sisters? Not his own real brothers and sisters, but his people, his community, the dark-skinned people. They were not free. It was, he says, I saw that it was not just my freedom that was curtailed, but the freedom of everyone who looked like I did. So he says, everyone who looked like me, everyone who was dark-skinned was not free. At that moment, he realized his hunger for freedom. And then he moved on towards the struggle for freedom. And what did he do then? He joined African National Congress. And he says, then I became it was this desire for freedom of my people to live their lives with dignity and self-respect that animated my life, that transformed a frightened young man into a bold one. So earlier he was frightened, he wanted to live his own life peacefully, and he did not want any interference. But now he has become a bold person, a person who is active in freedom struggle, who is not afraid of going to jail, who is not afraid of becoming a criminal according to the law. That time, what he did was against the law. So he says, now I turned earlier he was a family loving husband now he has turned into a man without home, that forced a life loving man to live like a monk. So now he has become a monk, and he says, I am no more virtuous or self-sacrificing than the next man, but I found that I could not even enjoy the poor and limited freedoms I was allowed when I knew my people were not free. So this always disturbed him now, that his people were not free. So next paragraph he says that though we were oppressed, the blacks were oppressed, but he says, I knew that the oppressor must be liberated just as surely as the oppressed. He says, the oppressed needs to be liberated. That everybody know. But he says, the one who is oppressing, like here, the whites were oppressing the blacks. So he says, they also need to be liberated. They also need to be freed. Freed from what? Freed from hatred. He says, a person who oppresses is not free from hatred, is a prisoner of hatred. So if we are oppressed, the one who's oppressing us is himself a prisoner of hatred. I am not truly free if I am taking away someone else's freedom, just as surely as I am not free when freedom is taken from me. The oppressed and the oppressor alike are robbed of their humanity. So he says, when the oppressor oppresses, then they are also robbed, then he is also robbed of humanity. He is not any more human. And the oppressed, obviously, he is robbed of his rights. So he is also away from basic rights, so is no more humane. Now, with that, we have finished the explanation of the chapter. I hope everything is clear to you. Now, I request you all to kindly go through all the oral comprehension check questions, and then try to do thinking about the text questions. And of course, learn from Nelson Mandela's life and his words. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. Goodbye.